Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her uniform one final time before stepping through the heavy oak doors of the Pentagon briefing room. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference table where a dozen senior officers sat in rigid formation. Their conversations ceased the moment she entered, replaced by the uncomfortable silence that always accompanied unexpected arrivals. Colonel Harrison, a weathered veteran with silver temples and sharp eyes, looked up from his classified documents with obvious irritation. His gaze swept over her staff sergeant stripes, lingered on her youthful face, then hardened with disapproval. The other officers followed his lead, their expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. Maria moved with quiet confidence toward the only empty chair, her boots clicking softly against the marble floor. She could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions hanging in the air like smoke. This was exactly what she had expected, exactly what her training had prepared her for. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe military families are common in your area, or perhaps you have seen situations like this where someone had to prove themselves against the odds. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. Sergeant Santos, the colonel said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. I don't recall seeing your name on the authorized personnel list for this briefing. The classified materials we're discussing today require top-secret clearance and a need-to-know basis that, frankly, I question whether you possess. Maria remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back in perfect military posture. Her dark eyes met his without flinching, though she could sense the other officers leaning forward in their chairs, anticipating her response. Major Williams, seated to the colonel's left, shifted uncomfortably and glanced at his watch. "Sir," she replied, her voice steady and respectful, "I have the appropriate clearance and authorization to be here. My orders came directly through secure channels this morning." The colonel's eyebrows rose skeptically. "From whom exactly?" He gestured toward the thick manila folders spread across the table, each marked with red classification stamps. "This briefing concerns Operation Silent Thunder, one of our most sensitive ongoing missions. I find it highly irregular that a staff sergeant would be cleared for this level of intelligence without my prior knowledge." A murmur rippled through the room as the other officers exchanged glances. Maria could feel the walls closing in, but her expression remained calm and composed. She had been in situations like this before, though never quite at this level of command. The weight of the moment pressed against her shoulders like an invisible burden, yet she stood firm. Colonel Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the briefing room. The tension in the air thickened as he walked around the table, his measured steps deliberate and intimidating. The other officers watched in silence, some looking uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation. "I'm going to need to see your orders immediately, Sergeant," he demanded, extending his hand with military precision. "No one enters this room without proper documentation, and I personally reviewed every name on the clearance list last night. Your name was not among them." Maria reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a single folded document, her movements calm and unhurried despite the pressure mounting around her. The paper looked standard, unremarkable, yet something in her confidence gave several officers pause. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, seated near the window, leaned forward with growing curiosity. The colonel snatched the document from her hand and unfolded it with sharp, aggressive motions. His eyes scanned the text quickly, then stopped. His expression shifted from irritation to confusion as he read more carefully. The room fell into complete silence except for the soft hum of the ventilation system overhead. "This says you're assigned to Task Force Phantom," he said slowly, his voice losing some of its earlier certainty. "But that's impossible. Task Force Phantom doesn't exist in any official capacity that I'm aware of." Maria watched the colonel's face carefully as he studied the document, noting the subtle shift in his demeanor. The aggressive certainty that had filled his voice moments before was beginning to crack, replaced by something she recognized as doubt. Around the table, the other officers sensed the change in atmosphere, their attention now fully focused on the unfolding drama. "Sir," With respect, she said quietly, there are many operational units that exist outside standard channels. My assignment here today is legitimate and necessary for the success of Operation Silent Thunder. The colonel looked up sharply at her words. How do you know the operation's name? That information is classified at the highest levels. He held up the document, studying it more intently. This authorization code, he muttered, almost to himself. I've never seen anything like this format. Major Williams cleared his throat nervously. Colonel, perhaps we should contact command for verification before proceeding. But Maria shook her head slightly. Sir, I understand your caution, but time is critical. The intelligence I'm here to provide has a narrow window of relevance. Every minute we spend on verification protocols brings us closer to mission compromise. Her words carried a weight that surprised even her. The room fell silent again as the officers processed her statement. Colonel Harrison's grip on the document tightened, and Maria could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew about military protocol and chain of command. The colonel's patience finally snapped. He slammed the document down on the polished table with enough force to make several officers jump in their seats. The sound reverberated through the room like a gunshot, breaking the careful military decorum that had held the meeting together. This is absolutely unacceptable, he declared, his voice rising with authority and frustration. I don't care what kind of ghost unit you claim to represent, Sergeant. No one, and I mean no one, walks into my briefing room without proper verification through established channels. He turned to Major Williams with sharp, decisive movements. Major, contact security immediately. I want this individual escorted from the premises until we can verify her credentials through proper military intelligence channels. This briefing contains information that could compromise ongoing operations if it falls into the wrong hands. Maria remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged despite the escalating confrontation. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly torn between following their superiors' orders and a growing sense that something significant was unfolding before them. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson watched her carefully, noting her complete lack of panic or protest. Sir, Maria said calmly, I understand your position completely. However, I must respectfully request that you examine the authentication codes more carefully before taking that action. You may find them more familiar than you initially realized. Colonel Harrison's hand froze halfway to the secure phone as Maria's words registered. Something in her tone, a quiet confidence that bordered on certainty, made him pause. He picked up the document again, this time examining it with a methodical attention to detail that had earned him his rank. The authentication codes were printed in a font he didn't immediately recognize, but as he studied them more closely, a memory stirred in the back of his mind. Years ago, during his time at the War College, he had seen similar formatting in highly classified briefings that dealt with special access programs. Major Williams watched nervously as the colonel's expression shifted from anger to concentration. The room remained silent except for the soft rustle of paper as Harrison turned the document over, searching for additional markings or watermarks that might provide clarity. Maria stood with her hands still clasped behind her back, patient as stone. She had been through this process before, though never in such a high-stakes environment. The weight of her true mission pressed against her consciousness, reminding her of the critical intelligence she carried and the narrow window of opportunity that was slowly closing with each passing moment. Sir, she said softly, if I may direct your attention to the lower right corner of the authorization. You'll find a classification marking that should clarify my presence here today. The colonel's eyes narrowed as he focused on the corner Maria had indicated. There, printed in barely visible ink, was a classification marking he had not seen in over a decade. His breath caught slightly as recognition dawned, and he looked up at Maria with an expression that had transformed completely from skepticism to something approaching alarm. The other officers sensed the dramatic shift in their commanding officer's demeanor. Major Williams leaned forward, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever had caused such a profound change in the colonel's attitude. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson set down his coffee cup with careful precision, his full attention now focused on the unfolding situation. Maria noted the exact moment when understanding flickered across Harrison's features. She had seen that look before, the sudden realization that they were dealing with something far beyond their normal operational parameters. The weight of classified knowledge settling over someone who suddenly understood they were out of their depth. "Where did you get this authorization?" the colonel asked quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier hostility. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he held the document, and Maria could see him mentally calculating the implications of what he was reading. The briefing room felt charged with tension as everyone waited for her response. Through the tall windows, she could see clouds gathering over the Pentagon courtyard, casting shifting shadows across the conference table where 12 careers hung in the balance. Maria reached slowly into her inner jacket pocket, her movements deliberate and measured. The entire room watched in complete silence as she withdrew a small leather credential case, the kind that senior intelligence officials carried, but that few had ever seen up close. The leather was worn smooth from use, suggesting years of service rather than recent issue. Colonel Harrison's face had gone pale as he processed the implications of what he was witnessing. The classification marking on her orders represented access levels that existed in theoretical discussions among the highest echelons of military command, not in the hands of staff sergeants in Pentagon briefing rooms. "Sir," Maria said with quiet respect, "my authorization comes directly from the Special Activities Division. I'm here today because Operation Silent Thunder has been compromised at multiple levels and conventional intelligence channels are no longer secure." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Major Williams actually pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as his hand shook slightly. The very mention of the Special Activities Division sent waves of recognition and fear through the assembled officers. Colonel Harrison stared at the credential case in her hands, understanding that his entire perception of the situation had been completely wrong from the moment she walked through the door. The young staff sergeant he had dismissed as an administrative error was something else entirely. The credential case remained closed in Maria's hands as she watched the colonel process the magnitude of his mistake. Around the table, 12 senior officers sat in stunned silence, each one mentally reviewing everything they had said and done since her arrival. The casual dismissal, the questioning of her authority, the threat to have her removed by security, all of it now took on a completely different meaning. Colonel Harrison's military bearing had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Where moments before he had stood with the confident authority of a commanding officer, he now carried himself with the careful respect reserved for encounters with forces beyond his operational scope. His hand smoothed his uniform unconsciously, a nervous gesture that spoke volumes about his internal state. Maria could see the questions forming in his mind, the rapid calculations of how to proceed when everything he thought he knew about the situation had been turned upside down. The other officers looked between them like spectators at a tennis match, uncertain of their role in this unprecedented scenario. The afternoon sun had shifted during their confrontation, casting new shadows across the classified documents spread on the table. Operation Silent Thunder, the mission they had gathered to discuss, now seemed like a secondary concern compared to the revelation unfolding before them. "Colonel," she said softly, "I need you to understand that what happens in the next few minutes will determine whether this operation succeeds or fails completely." Maria opened the credential case with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent briefing room. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a badge unlike anything most of the officers had ever seen. The metal gleamed with a distinctive finish, and the insignia bore markings that existed only in the most classified corners of military intelligence. Colonel Harrison's breath caught audibly as he recognized the symbol. Task Force Phantom wasn't just a name on her orders, it was one of the most elite and secretive units in the entire military structure. Personnel who carried those credentials operated with authority that superseded normal chain of command protocols. The badge bore her name, rank, and a clearance level that made several officers unconsciously straighten in their chairs. Major Williams stared openly, his earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson had gone completely still as if afraid that any movement might somehow compromise his own security clearance. Maria closed the case and returned it to her jacket with the same deliberate care she had shown throughout the confrontation. The simple action carried more weight than any verbal declaration could have achieved. She had just proven that she belonged in that room more than any of them could have imagined. "Sir," she said to Colonel Harrison, her voice now carrying the quiet authority that came with her true position, "I believe we can now proceed with the briefing. Time is still critical for mission success." Colonel Harrison stepped back from the table and executed a precise military salute, his earlier hostility completely transformed into professional respect. The gesture sent a clear signal to every officer in the room about how dramatically the power dynamic had shifted. One by one, the other senior officers rose from their chairs and followed suit, creating a moment of profound acknowledgement. "Agent Santos," the colonel said, his voice now carrying the deference appropriate for her true rank and authority, "I apologize for the delay in recognizing your credentials. Please, take my seat at the head of the table." Maria returned the salute with equal precision before moving to the position of authority she had been meant to occupy from the beginning. The classified folders that had seemed so important to protect from her unauthorized eyes were now spread before her, as she assumed control of the briefing that should have been hers all along. The transformation in the room was complete and undeniable. Where minutes before she had been questioned and threatened with removal, she now commanded the attention and respect of 12 senior military officers. The young staff sergeant they had dismissed was revealed to be one of the most highly cleared operatives in the entire defense establishment. Major Williams cleared his throat nervously. "Agent Santos, what can you tell us about the security breach you mentioned? How extensive is the compromise to Operation Silent Thunder?" Maria settled into the colonel's chair with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through years of classified service that none of them would ever fully understand. The afternoon sun caught the edge of her task force phantom badge through her jacket, a subtle reminder of the authority she now wielded in the room. "The intelligence I carry concerns a double agent operating within our communications network," she began, her voice taking on the crisp professionalism of a seasoned operative. "Operation Silent Thunder has been compromised for 3 weeks. Every move we've planned, every target we've identified, has been reported to hostile forces through channels we thought were secure." The officers exchanged alarmed glances as the implications sank in. Colonel Harrison, now standing respectfully to her right, nodded grimly as pieces of recent intelligence failures began to make sense in this new context. "Thanks to Task Force Phantom's investigation, we've identified the breach and can proceed with a modified operational plan that will turn this compromise into our advantage. The mission will succeed, but it requires immediate implementation of new protocols that I'm authorized to put into effect." As the briefing concluded with new orders and restored confidence, Maria reflected on how respect, when truly earned, could transform any room and any mission. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when it mattered most.